It's terrible that after 50 years, it is behind closed doors.
Camilla expected Windsor to look exactly as she had left it. The guards were in position. The doors opened on schedule. Nothing outside suggested a crisis. But inside, something had changed. One familiar portrait was gone, then another. Then every hallway told the same brutal story. Before anyone spoke a word to her, the Queen had already received the message. Windsor had removed her image from every prominent hall, and someone had ordered it done before she arrived. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla stopped suddenly that the aide behind her nearly walked into her. A pale rectangle marked the place where her portrait had hung. Windsor Castle was not another royal residence. It carried the memory of sovereigns, ceremonies, and history for generations. A portrait displayed in its halls was more than decoration. It signaled standing, continuity, and belonging. She stared at the empty space, then asked quietly, "Where is it?" The nearest staff member lowered his eyes. She moved forward before anyone could answer. Another corridor brought another absence. Then another. Every official portrait of Camilla had been removed from Windsor's principal halls, reception corridors, and private royal passageways under a household instruction. Nothing bearing her likeness had replaced them. Charles remained on the walls. William remained. Catherine remained. Images of the late Queen remained untouched. Only Camilla had disappeared, and that distinction transformed confusion into humiliation. Camilla turned toward an aide and demanded to know when this had happened. He hesitated, then admitted the removals had begun before dawn. Staff had received instructions to complete the work before her vehicle entered the grounds. The timing crushed any hope that this was routine redecorating. Someone had wanted the change finished before she could object, question it, or even see it happening. Her next question landed harder. Did Charles authorize this? No one answered. King Charles was both her husband and the reigning monarch, meaning he held final authority over household decisions. His silence now felt more threatening than an accusation. Camilla knew he was somewhere inside Windsor, yet he had not come to meet her. She pressed again, and the aide refused to speculate. Then an aide stepped closer. Charles was waiting in a private room, he said, but he was not alone. William had arrived before sunrise. He was waiting inside. Camilla said nothing. She looked again at the empty wall, gathered herself, and started toward the closed door. The portraits were devastating, but the greater shock was waiting behind it. The walls had changed only after the relationships inside Windsor had already broken. The portrait removals were not merely about paintings. They struck directly at three people who had spent years negotiating power, loyalty, marriage, and succession. For Camilla, those empty spaces threatened recognition. For Charles, they exposed the cost of protecting the crown from private conflict. And for William, Windsor had become something even more personal, a symbol of what the monarchy would look like when his generation finally inherited responsibility for it. Camilla entered the private room, carrying more hurt than anger. Charles was already there, and William stood nearby. Windsor was not simply a family home. It was a working royal residence, a place where duty and private life overlapped. That made its walls matter. A portrait there suggested permanence, acceptance, and a place within the crown. She looked first at her husband. Camilla had spent years moving from controversy toward public recognition, and becoming queen had seemed to seal that journey. Now the empty spaces felt like that progress had been reversed in one morning. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked Charles. The king lowered his eyes before answering, and that hesitation cut deeper than any explanation. Charles looked exhausted. An aide had asked earlier whether he wanted more time, but he refused and told them to send her in. He knew delay would make the wound worse. Yet his position was difficult. As monarch, he carried responsibility for protecting the institution, while as Camilla's husband, he understood how personal the removal would feel. He had allowed the decision to proceed, and she knew it. William finally spoke. He explained that Windsor represented beyond the present reign because it remained closely tied to Queen Elizabeth II, his late grandmother, whose long rule had shaped his sense of duty. The prince had become fiercely protective of symbols connected to her memory. He had not merely heard about the removals afterward. He had been present during the early morning discussions and personally challenged whether several portraits should remain. Camilla turned toward him, stunned by how deeply involved he had been. She asked whether this had been his decision. William did not answer immediately. Charles did. No, he said. His son had not possessed the authority to act alone. But the king could have stopped it. He had not. That truth changed the room. Camilla now understood that the deepest betrayal was not William's objection, but Charles's refusal to intervene. And the reason for that refusal reached back to one private Windsor incident involving the late Queen's legacy. To understand why Charles remained silent, and why William arrived before dawn, the story has to return to the moment when one private conversation made these empty walls almost inevitable. Weeks before Camilla entered Windsor and found her image erased from its halls, one conversation had already changed everything. It happened after a private family reception commemorating Queen Elizabeth II. The guests had gone. Staff were clearing the rooms. Charles believed the evening had ended peacefully. But inside a smaller drawing room, Camilla and William confronted one another over something deceptively simple. Who had the authority to reshape spaces still emotionally associated with the late Queen? Camilla had spent months taking interest in how residences reflected the reign. To her, Windsor could honor the past without being frozen inside it. William saw the matter differently. The prince believed certain rooms carried Elizabeth II's memory and could not be reshaped casually. A remembrance reception, meaning a private gathering held to honor someone who died, made that tension raw. Camilla made the move that changed everything. After the reception, she instructed staff to relocate one family portrait of the late Queen from a principal corridor and place a newer formal portrait of herself there instead. William entered during the discussion. He stopped the staff and told them not to move anything until Charles reviewed the decision. She dismissed the aides and turned on him. Camilla told William she would not accept being treated like a temporary occupant in her husband's reign. The future king answered that modernization could not become replacement, especially in spaces tied to his grandmother. Neither raised their voice. That made the exchange worse. Every word carried frustration. William found Charles later and told him exactly what had happened. The king listened, removed his reading glasses, and set them on the table. He asked one question. Which portrait had Camilla wanted moved? His son answered. Charles went silent because he understood the argument had crossed a line. This was no longer about decoration. It was about memory, rank, and who had the right to define Windsor. Charles responded by ordering a private inventory of portraits added, moved, or given prominence since his reign began. An inventory is a formal record of what is present and where it belongs. Camilla was not told the review had begun. William did not control it, but he pushed one principle. The late Queen's significant spaces should not be altered through personal preference. Then the review changed direction. Windsor officials concluded that restoring one portrait would not solve the dispute. William argued that several of Camilla's images had become part of the same symbolic conflict. That private disagreement created the fracture. But the real explosion came when Camilla finally stood face to face with the two men who had allowed Windsor's walls to deliver their verdict before either of them spoke. Camilla enters the room carrying no notes, no prepared defense, and no attempt to disguise her anger. Charles is standing beside the fireplace. William remains near the far end of the room. For several seconds, nobody sits. Then she asks the only question that matters. Did you order this? Charles hesitates. William looks directly at her. And in that brief silence, Camilla realizes the answer may be worse than a simple yes. Charles turns toward the aides and tells them to leave. He closes the door himself. No private secretaries remain, meaning no senior royal staff members are present to manage the conversation or soften the language. This is no formal meeting. It is a family confrontation, and every sentence carries the weight of marriage, succession, and wounded trust. Camilla ignores William at first. She fixes her attention on her husband and says, "You let them take me down before I even arrived." Charles does not deny it. The king looks exhausted, but she reads his silence as confirmation. Her anger changes into something colder. She expected resistance from the prince. She had not expected Charles to stand aside while the order was carried out. William finally steps in. He says Windsor cannot send two messages at once about continuity and hierarchy. Hierarchy, in this context, means the order of rank and responsibility inside the royal family. The future king argues that the portraits had become part of a larger struggle over whose legacy Windsor was being asked to emphasize. Camilla accuses him of engineering humiliation, William refuses to retreat. He tells her humiliation was never the objective. Charles interrupts before the argument sharpens further. He explains that none of the portraits were destroyed. Some may return to less sensitive spaces, but their removal from Windsor's principal halls is not temporary. Camilla stares at him. The distinction matters because this is not a pause meant to calm tempers. It is policy. She turns back to William and asks whether he had authority to do this alone. Charles answers before his son can speak. No. Then he delivers the part that breaks her certainty. The final approval was his. The prince argued for the change, but the king accepted the recommendation and made the decision irreversible. Camilla does not answer immediately. Charles tells her there is one part of the internal review she has not seen. It does not concern William's feelings. It concerns the late queen's established arrangements for Windsor. Camilla had arrived prepared to blame William, but Charles's admission changed the fight completely. Because the next revelation would show that the king believed he was defending something larger than either his son or his wife. Power inside a monarchy rarely announces itself with raised voices. Sometimes it appears as a signature, sometimes as a locked cabinet, and sometimes as a portrait quietly disappearing before sunrise. Charles now has to explain why he approved a decision that wounded his wife so publicly inside their own family home. The answer is buried in a review of Windsor's ceremonial spaces, and in his growing fear that unresolved personal rivalries were beginning to reshape the crown itself. Charles knew the authority behind the decision could no longer be hidden behind procedure. As monarch, he held final responsibility for major household choices at Windsor. The royal household, meaning the staff and offices that support the sovereign and manage official residences, could advise him, but it could not replace his judgment. William could argue, recommend, and apply pressure. Only the king could approve the final instruction. The review had reached a troubling conclusion. Several prominent rooms and corridors had accumulated symbolic changes without one clear policy governing what belonged where. Charles feared that every new disagreement would become another contest over memory, rank, and influence. He decided continuity had to come before personal preference, even when that choice threatened peace inside his marriage. Charles had made the final decision alone the previous evening. He read the recommendation twice, set down his pen, walked away, then returned to the table. For several seconds he stared at the signature line. Then he signed. The order authorized the removals before Camilla arrived, and he knew exactly how she would interpret it. William confronted his father afterward. The prince told him that avoiding difficult decisions only pushed the consequences into the next reign. Charles stiffened at that. His son was not merely criticizing one choice. He was questioning whether the king had allowed private loyalties to weaken institutional clarity. Charles answered that accepting the recommendation did not mean he enjoyed it. He knew Camilla would see betrayal where he saw restraint. Charles then explained the wider reset. Windsor's display policy would now be organized around reign, succession, historical continuity, and ceremonial significance, rather than personal seniority alone. Succession means the formal order determining who inherits the crown. The rule would apply to everyone, including William. Camilla's portraits were only the most painful first consequence. The decision moved through the household quickly. Staff understood that Charles had upheld it even after seeing his wife's distress. That changed how they read the balance of influence inside Windsor. What began as a symbolic correction was becoming something far more personal, because within hours, Camilla would discover that the empty walls were not the only thing around her that had changed and could not return. The argument ends without reconciliation. Camilla leaves first. No one follows her. That detail matters. Only hours earlier, staff would have rushed ahead to anticipate her movements. Now the corridors feel different. Not openly hostile, not disrespectful, but cautious. Windsor has absorbed the decision. Camilla has too. And when she reaches the private sitting room prepared for her, she finally allows the anger to give way to something she had resisted since arriving: sadness. Camilla closes the door behind her and finally stops performing strength. The household has already been told that the portrait changes are settled policy and cannot be reversed without direct authorization. That matters because settled policy means the decision has moved beyond a private argument and into an official rule staff must follow. No one can quietly restore the portraits after tempers cool. The queen consort now understands that her preferences can be overruled Even inside spaces where she once assumed her influence would carry decisive weight. She removes her gloves, places them carefully beside her handbag, and sits without speaking. An attendant asks whether she wants tea. Camilla says no, and asks to be left alone. The small refusal says more than anger could. She has spent years learning how to endure public judgment, but this wound feels different because it came from inside the family, and because Charles allowed Windsor itself to deliver the message before he did. Charles arrives later and finds the door closed. He waits before knocking again. When Camilla finally lets him enter, she does not raise her voice. She tells the king he could have warned her privately. He could have told her the portraits were coming down before she walked through hall after hall, discovering the decision herself. Charles listens, then apologizes for the way she learned about it. He does not apologize for approving it. That distinction devastates her. Camilla realizes the real loss is no longer the portraits. It is the protection she had assumed marriage would provide when institutional pressure became personal. Charles has now shown that his obligations as monarch can stand apart from his instinct to defend his wife. The king sees the hurt clearly, but he refuses to blur that boundary again. Camilla surprises him. She does not demand restoration, threaten to leave, or call William back into the argument. Instead, she asks Charles to return later that evening, with no staff, no advisors, and no prince in the room. For the first time that day, Windsor's argument would leave the institution outside the door, and what Camilla told Charles in private would determine whether the humiliation hardened into permanent bitterness or became something else entirely between them both. That evening there are no advisors, no household files, and no heir waiting nearby. Only Charles and Camilla remain in the room. The argument that began with portraits finally becomes a conversation about something far more painful: fear. Camilla fears being erased. Charles fears allowing marriage to dictate monarchy. Neither can solve those fears by winning. And as the room grows quiet, both understand that whatever happens next must come from two people, not two royal titles. Camilla had asked for this meeting without staff or advisors, and Charles respected that request. He left his papers outside because she wanted no official language between them. A household review, meaning an internal examination of how royal spaces and decisions are managed, had already caused damage. Now she wanted him to listen as her husband before he answered as king. She tells Charles what the empty walls did to her. Seeing every likeness removed brought back years when acceptance felt fragile and conditional. Camilla had fought through public hostility to reach a place she believed was secure. Their sudden disappearance made her feel that one decision could erase decades of progress in a single morning. Charles does not interrupt. When she finishes, he admits the part he can no longer defend. He should have warned her before Windsor did. The king still believes the policy was necessary, but he accepts that avoiding the conversation turned an administrative decision into a personal wound. Camilla hears the difference. For the first time that day, he is not defending procedure. He is admitting failure. Camilla then says something Charles did not expect. She no longer believes every objection from William is an attack on her. The prince is protecting Elizabeth II's memory and worrying about what he will inherit when his own reign begins. She still dislikes how he handled the conflict, but she accepts that fear exists on both sides. Charles gives her a choice. He will not restore the portraits simply to end the argument, but Camilla can join a broader Windsor review deciding where images from the current reign belong. Reign means the period during which a monarch rules. She pauses, then refuses the easier victory. "Do not put them back because I am hurt," she tells him. That answer changes everything between them. Camilla has stopped asking the crown to prove her worth through wall space, and Charles understands the hurt he caused. Yet their private calm will not remain private for long. By morning, word of the removals is spreading beyond Windsor. The palace will have to respond, and the empty spaces are about to become a national argument over Camilla's place in the monarchy. By morning, the story no longer belongs to Windsor. Broadcasters are discussing it. Newspaper editors are rebuilding front pages. Crowds begin gathering near the castle gates, staring toward windows they cannot see through. Yet one image dominates everything: Camilla arriving the previous day, stepping from her vehicle composed and unaware of what waited inside. Hours later, the public understands the brutal irony. She entered Windsor as queen, but behind those walls, Every formal image of her had already been taken down. Camilla wakes to a story that has escaped every private boundary. News organizations frame the removals as an extraordinary sign of changing royal dynamics, asking why her portraits disappeared while images of Charles, William, Catherine, and Elizabeth II remained untouched. A royal household statement, meaning an official message issued by palace staff, confirms that Windsor displays are being reorganized but refuses to discuss private conversations between family members. The front page turns the dispute into national theater. One major morning newspaper prints a full-width image of Windsor's long walk beneath the stark headline, "The Empty Walls," with a smaller photograph of Camilla arriving the previous afternoon. Outside Windsor Station, commuters hold up copies while television crews report live. The image captures the contradiction perfectly. She had arrived publicly composed while privately walking into humiliation. Camilla receives the newspapers at breakfast. She studies that front page for several seconds, then folds it inward until her own photograph disappears. She does not comment. The Queen Consort continues eating, but the silence says enough. Years of public hostility have taught her how quickly sympathy can turn into judgment, and now the most painful family conflict of the reign has become public property. William hears the coverage and refuses to treat it as victory. He tells an aide that the decision was never meant to become a public defeat for Camilla. The prince had pushed for institutional clarity, not spectacle. His discomfort matters because it shows that even the person who challenged her most strongly understands how brutal the consequences have become once private symbolism is turned into national drama. Charles sees the division hardening and decides there will be no competing briefings, no quiet reversal, and no attempt to feed either side of the debate. The king will speak privately with Camilla and William before anyone leaves Windsor. The public has turned the missing portraits into a contest with winners and losers, but Charles is about to deliver a final judgment that rejects that interpretation entirely. He knows the monarchy cannot survive if every private disagreement becomes a public scoreboard. This time, Charles intends to define the principle himself and make both sides live with it without further argument. The final meeting is quieter than the confrontation that began everything. Camilla returns to the same room. William arrives moments later. Charles does not ask either of them to forget what happened, because forgetting would make the pain meaningless. Instead, the king makes the principle unmistakable. Windsor will preserve its historical continuity, the portrait removals will stand, and no member of the family, including his wife or his heir, will be allowed to turn royal symbolism into personal territory again. Charles speaks first, and removes any uncertainty. The portraits will not return to the Windsor halls from which they were taken. Future placement will follow a display policy, meaning a fixed set of rules deciding which royal images belong in important spaces and why. The king makes clear that personal pressure will no longer decide what appears on those walls. William listens and realizes the rule limits him too. The prince may defend Elizabeth II's legacy, but he cannot dictate Windsor's presentation because he will inherit the crown. Charles tells his son that continuity matters only when it is protected by principle rather than personal ownership. William accepts the boundary because he understands the monarchy cannot survive if every generation treats history as private territory. Camilla does not ask for the portraits back. She tells Charles that she understands what he is trying to establish, even though the way she discovered the decision will remain painful. The Queen Consort does not forgive the humiliation by pretending it never happened. Instead, she accepts that her position cannot depend on seeing her image displayed in every important corridor. William then acknowledges the part he got wrong. He tells Camilla that removing every portrait at once was harsher than he intended. She answers that intention does not erase impact, but she accepts the admission. Their relationship is not suddenly warm, it becomes something more believable, cautious, bruised, and finally honest. Camilla leaves the room with less certainty about influence, but more clarity about her place. Before departing Windsor, she passes the corridor where she first noticed the empty space. This time she does not stop. She understands that being queen cannot be proved by a frame on a wall. Charles has drawn the boundary he avoided for too long. William has learned that defending legacy does not justify humiliation. Camilla has lost symbolic territory, but not her identity. The portraits remain removed. The decision stands, and Windsor's empty walls become the moment all three finally accept that the crown must be larger than anyone's need for recognition. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.